Hey folks, Valentin the Mad here, and today we'll be looking at the response mechanics in the Dead Space remake. So, when it comes to dismemberment, you generally have 2 points of amputation per limb. The head can be removed. And you have some specialties, like the tail for this guy, the inner stomach arms, the tentacles for the baby thing, and so on. The looks are basically okay. They don't stand out as particularly nasty, but they do fit the bottom layer of the non-dismembering system decently well. What is quite cool is actually the ligaments thing, where they'll be somewhat attached to the body or even other parts that came off for a few seconds. Not something massively fancy, but it is pretty cool. The issue would be the disassembly response when a character gets killed by explosives. It may look cool sometimes, especially with slow motion, but when that's the exact response on almost every single explosive fatality, it won't deliver good feedback. But look at the bright side, at least we do have the torso hunk of meat stay and it doesn't explode into generic chunks as we saw quite often in many games. The main feature here, however, is the non-dismembering multi-layer damage. So, you have a peeling system for most characters. Shots will reveal a bottom layer at the point of impact of muscles, bones and organs, and there will be blood around the wound as well. As usual with such systems, the bottom layer can be damaged, and that along with the damage the average enemy can take does make it feel like the game is asking for a cut-in-half dismemberment variation as well. What in my impression is the larger issue would be the rather big area of effect for every shot. Each one blows out a pretty big chunk. On the medium difficulty, enemies can still take a good bit of damage, and what happens is that you just reveal a lot of the pinkish bottom layer. Along with that, many characters barely have any blood around the wound, so the result doesn't look particularly good. Overall, at the core it is quite a good system. Peeling happens where you shoot, you do have the feature of blood on the top layer, you have a good transition between the layers, but once again, the large area of effect and the amount of damage characters can take lead to results that aren't quite as nasty as they could be with such mechanics. For burning, you also have activation of the multi-layer system, but the bottom layer will be crispy charred. There will be a short animation sometimes, but as with most deaths, you usually have an insta-ragdoll response. Impalement is a thing too. Not as dynamic as something like Overgrowth or more recently Half-Sword, but you can impale specific body parts using other body parts of the character. The issue, as you can see, is the jank. As for player deaths, you have specific animations for getting grabbed by certain enemies, but mostly you have generic animations that are usually accompanied by dismemberment. Now, dead human bodies, props that are laying around, will have pretty cool looking multi-layer damage. And, as it once clipped in for me, apparently you have the same thing for Isaac too. So, I think you are supposed to have the multi-layer responses activated on the generic player deaths, but that seemingly got cut and replaced with just dismemberment. That is a shame. The generic deaths will be the most common response, and if instead of simple dismemberment, you'd see a chunk taken out of Isaac, wherever the fatal hit was, it would deliver a much stronger effect. In this case, the large chunk area of affecting would probably be good. And lastly, you do have bullet sponges. I was wondering if the multiplayer damage would be used here to deliver a more responsive experience, maybe even have it enhanced in some way for those specific battles. But that isn't the case. Basically, the damage doesn't even seem to be activated. I do think that eventually, someday, multiplayer damage will be used to make boss fights feel responsive, maybe even have more than 2 main layers, but we don't have it yet. In terms of blood spinning, you'll see respawn stains for some impacts. Sometimes a massive stain on the final hit, and blood pools. So there's a whole host of issues here. As I mentioned, you have stains for some impacts, not every blood splash. Very often the splashing will be notably disproportionate to the staining. It is something you will notice. And stains that aren't the very latest per enemy seem to vanish very quickly. The blood pool and other stains also have a rather small threshold. What does stay for an impressively long while are the bodies and the severed body parts. There really is no issue with those, but as you can see, without blood, you don't get the proper aftermath. But there is one more related issue. Post-mortally, the characters become a very weightless ragdoll. So, even assuming absolutely everything stayed, the moment you or even some other character passes by, the body would get displaced in pretty much no time. Just a very odd choice. As for the animations, you have responses on the initial hit, and changes of behavior for severing body parts. I have seen that animation several times, but those are uncommon. For the most part, characters will just ragdoll after the fatal hit. Overall, this will do. The changes of behavior are as cool as always well animated, and as I mentioned previously, severed limbs aren't always just biological waste. In conclusion, if you compare it to previous games in the series, it is a notable step up. You can't miss the multiplayer responses compared to the nothing you had previously, and while the blood spilling has some major issues, it is still better than the previous games. So, if you are a fan of the series, you are gonna enjoy it, and the better response on the enemies would definitely be noticeable, but if you're mainly looking for a responsive experience, this is not it. So, that is it for today. Do let me know how you feel in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and share it around. And do consider supporting on Patreon. For $1 a month you get the impressions videos a week early, you get the interviews a week early, I have a few coming up, and of course you do very much help out. So a big thank you to all the supporters, and consider joining as well. Also, if you like the music you hear in the intro, outro, and in the background, the YouTube and Spotify playlists are in the description. Until next time!